The way it is right. So then now check, make your audio. No, you don't. Real check. That's fine.
Welcome, everybody, to this joint meeting of the KPPCSD and the KFPD, the Kensington Police Protection and Community Services District and the Kensington Fire Protection District. Prior to the meeting, Dave and I sort of flipped a coin to see who would chair this meeting. So for now, it's me. The next time we have a joint meeting, it'll be Dave. Welcome, everyone. It is 6:37 p.m. on June 5th, 2024. We're in the Kensington Community Center, and I will now call the KFPD side of this joint meeting to order. Director Madugo.
Here.
Director Artis. Director Stein.
Here.
Director Watt.
Here.
And I'm Director Levine, passing it over.
Okay, and let's call the roll for the KPPCSD members.
Here. Here.
Here.
All right. We begin with public comment. As this is a special meeting, the public may address the board on any subject listed on the agenda, which is 1. Please address your comments to the board of directors and not to staff or the audience. Each speaker may address the board once under public comment for a limit of 3 minutes. The public will also be given an opportunity to speak on each agenda item. Once the public comment of the portion is for that agenda item is closed, there will be no further comment. So with that said, is there any public comment in the room? We will also have public comment for the one agenda item. So you have a general comment, not particular to the, okay. Any comment in the room? Going to the Zoom. Is there any public comment on the Zoom? Oh, more people are joining. All right. Going once. Going twice. Sold. All right. Moving right along to the star of the evening, discussion between our boards to discuss an administrative structure in a hypothetical combined district. So just to provide a little bit of context for those who may be coming to one of your first meetings of the Kensington governing boards, what we're discussing here is the potential of combining the 2 districts as they are now, the Kensington Police Protection and Community Services District and the Kensington Fire Protection District, into a single unified district. There are a couple of mechanisms by which this can happen, and so we've taken to sometimes saying the boards can be combined. In order to pursue such a combination, should we want to, we must first do a fiscal analysis to demonstrate that the districts combined are fiscally feasible to provide the services that they are currently providing as separate districts. So the main thrust of this meeting is basically to move that process forward. The districts both joined together to have a fiscal analysis in January, and that's been proceeding apace, analyzing the districts in isolation. And now we've turned to the question of what does this hypothetical combined district look like when combined? So now we're sort of starting to think about things that don't exist yet. So it seemed most prudent to have the boards be able to weigh in on what the structure of that district would look like. The details of this fiscally will be worked out by our consultant that the districts have contracted with, Dmitry Semenov of Ridgeline Municipal Services. So the main function that we're pursuing tonight is to have a discussion about what that administrative structure looks like so that Dmitry can and Ridgeline Municipal Services can work out the fiscal ramifications of that proposal. So that's sort of the background for why we're all here tonight. And I believe there's a staff report. So this staff report is going to be given by Mary Morris Mayorga, who's currently a consultant, different consultant for the Kensington Fire Protection District, and was also our former permanent general manager until a few months ago.
Thank you, President Levine.
Good evening to the Board of Directors, to staff, and to members of the public. Daniel gave a great, President Levine gave a great overview of the presentation, but I'm just going to kind of go through what the purpose of it is in our terms. Next slide. So we're currently in progress on that fiscal analysis to determine the impact of the potential combining into one organization. That's a project that we've been working on. We've been able to provide data based on information that we had, audits, budgets, things like that. So this hypothetical structure then is something that Ridgeline needs in order to continue with that fiscal analysis for the combined hypothetical agencies. And so we needed to put together an organizational structure administratively. So for purposes of that analysis, we've gone through and taken a look at what the administrative staffing needs were for both agencies, the general managers at the time. This started months ago, back in January. And we arrived at administrative staffing structure. Then this structure is presented here for purposes of gaining feedback prior to providing to Ridgeline so that they have the information that they need to continue with the fiscal analysis. Next. So what is the process? What steps did we take? So in January, the board presidents and general managers met to kind of review the timing for the overall fiscal analysis, the data, the report that would be coming back to the agencies, board meeting coordination dates, et cetera. So at that time, the general managers, David Aranda and myself, reviewed ideas on the administrative structure that would be needed for staffing requirements. Other areas of budgets are easier to define, like utilities and supplies and things like that. But administratively, staffing would change from what it is currently with the two separate agencies. So the board presidents provided some initial feedback. Then the general managers continued to work over the next few months. And so this hypothetical administrative structure has been drafted in the form of an organization chart, just to keep it high level, so that we have what we need to continue. I think it's important to note that this is for the fiscal analysis, not set in stone. It's based on the best information we have and reasonable for purposes of the analysis. If the agencies combined and for some reason that model didn't specifically serve the districts well, they could reassess at that time. We wouldn't anticipate that there would be any major cost change because we have a solid handle on what's needed administrative staffing wise. I know the community has a good sense of what's needed service delivery wise, and the board of directors does as well. So we're here to gain feedback in the event there's anything else that we need to consider incorporating. So in arriving at this hypothetical, we call it that just to make sure that it's something that we're providing for this purpose. What did we do and what's it based on? So just for background purposes and reference, so we took our backgrounds from various agencies. So for mine, I have 9 years of private agency experience and 31 years of public agency experience. So that's in the areas of the private sector is engineering firms, investments, banking, and then also nonprofit organization in the area of social services. And then cities, counties, special districts, and joint powers agencies. So cities, full service cities with all of your general services, as well as police and fire, parks and recreation, and then counties with environmental management and airport management, special districts in the areas of water and wastewater, fire for Kensington Fire, and also Sac Metro Fire, and then also Joint Powers Agency with an emergency radio authority. So a lot of years of business and admin and finance and general services, as well as human resources experience to be able to put together what we think is needed. And then I know David also has background that I'll let him share so that you have kind of a reference for how we arrived at this.
Thanks, Mary. So my background is 10 years of being a general manager for a golf resort, which had over 200 employees. You can imagine all the different departments we dealt with, but probably more importantly, in conjunction with our discussion here, is my 18+ years with Stallion Springs, and the fact that we not only did parks and police, but we did solid waste and roads and water and sewer and CCNRs. So there was a lot of different departments and a lot of staffing that was involved, with a lot of crossover that employees had to do in regard to their different responsibilities. I also sat on an insurance pool, SDRMA, for over 20 years. So from a staffing standpoint, I've seen the responsibility of being a general manager at Stallion and being a director at SDRMA and establishing organizational structure as one of 7 as a director on SDRMA. I've also worked for some smaller districts over the last few years in consulting, but really I took my experience with Stallion and with the responsibilities that Stallion carried with it, in conjunction with the need that you'll see as Mary portrays this information with the different positions.
So the first organization chart are just going to be the individual charts for both agencies. So we have the Kensington Fire Protection District, starting with the Kensington community that feeds into the, giving feedback to the board of directors. The board of directors then has the oversight of the general counsel, our legal counsel, that's a contracted service, our fire chief, which is a contracted service with the city of El Cerrito, then a general manager position, 0.5 to 0.75 FTE. Busy right now with the public safety building, but that's the general need for that position. An executive assistant board clerk, currently filled temporary, with a 0.25 to 0.5 FTE, and FTE, full-time equivalent, for anyone who hasn't dealt with that before. We have the emergency preparedness coordinator, which is a contract position, and then an accounting firm that we utilize as a consulting for accounting services. Then our next one is for the police and community services district. So the people of Kensington feeding into the board of directors, the board of directors then having oversight over the general manager position, which is a half-time FTE, general counsel, legal counsel, and Edie Bailey, the financial consultant, and then the chief of police with a consultant position, lieutenant position, the sergeant positions, volunteers, officers with additional oversight of officers. And then a senior accountant, account clerk position, 0.75 FTE, board clerk, 0.4, admin assistant, parks coordinator, 0.4 FTE, and public services assistant, 0.6 FTE. Just to kind of give you the feel for what they look like separately. And then, of course, Ridgeline will need that information just to know what they look like separately, and then this hypothetical combined, what they might look like. So for the next one, the organizational chart that we arrived at, based on our experiences I described, we have the board of the community of Kensington, and then I know this print gets a little bit tiny here, board of directors, general counsel. And what I'll do is kind of go over this organization chart, and then I have a staffing kind of description next that I'll go into a little bit more detail. So the general counsel, the fire chief, the contract services, the general manager position, which we would then say would be a 1.0 FTE, board clerk position at 0.75 FTE, then the police chief and lieutenant sergeants, I kind of summarized that component would not change. These are dealing with the administrative functions. The finance HR manager position, 1.0 FTE, with oversight of an administrative assistant, 0.5 FTE, a park worker, 0.5 FTE, and then public safety coordinator, 1.0 FTE. So on the next one, kind of describing the overall functions. So the board of directors. Those would be combined. I know we had a presentation last April that kind of talked about what happens that reduces in conjunction with terms. And I'm not proposing to go over that here. That's for another time, but just to kind of reference how that would work. General counsel, that would be combined, and we wouldn't see any some significant impact on needs. That contracted service is billed hourly for both agencies, so we wouldn't necessarily anticipate that changing. For administration, the changes would be to staffing and consulting needs that I'll go over in more detail. And then the fire contract would be no change. And then police would be no change as far as organizational structure that we're aware of. So as far as administration and staffing, so the general manager position coming up with the 1.0 FTE. So some of that workload we evaluated could be shifted to what we now created as a finance HR manager. So we had a finance position with the police protection and community services district, but that's a contracted service with the fire protection district. So some of the workload that the general managers are currently doing could be shifted to that position. And I'll just go over that in just a moment. Board clerk is a 0.75 FTE. Some of the workload that's currently performed, the KPPCSD has a board clerk, the KFPD has a combined position that has a board clerk. So some of the workload would be shifted to the administrative assistant that we talked about. The finance HR manager. So we have that set at 1.0 FTE. So what this would do would be to eliminate some of the consulting services we have for finance. And then also take some workload from the GM that is done related to human resources. And that's a critical function. And it's really ultimately handled by the general managers, I believe, of both agencies. So shifting some of that would be what helps us to keep the GM at 1.0 FTE. The administrative assistant, 0.50 FTE, would take some of the workload from the board clerk, especially with the combined position that we have at Kensington Fire, that would be split. And then the park worker position, 0.50 FTE. So this is building and grounds janitorial, and it would convert from contract, which would contract services, which would allow for some flexibility and cleaning up after events. So sometimes when you have those contract services, it's difficult to get what you need done in the timing that you need it done. So converting that to a position would be more efficient. And the public safety coordinator, so this is a 1.0 FTE. So this would convert in the hypothetical situation here from the existing consulting that the KFPD has for the emergency preparedness coordinator, and then would also manage grants and assist the GM. We, on both sides, essentially have some gaps that we note with some of the tasks that come to the general manager being something that kind of a second in charge could help with. Public safety coordinator, we thought would be a good title for that position, because it could kind of take some of those tasks that maybe aren't high level, but that need to be done to keep things going, maybe take care of some of the things to keep things going while the GM is on vacation or out of the office. So it's kind of assisting with that workflow. So in summary, we, put this together with our best assessment based on our experience and what we see that we could provide to Ridgeline for the fiscal analysis purposes. It would be, the way that we see the functions could be handled, given the resources of both agencies. Just kind of a back of the envelope calculation. We don't see a huge savings. There are some shifts and some reductions in contract services. So there might be a little bit of savings, but that's something that Ridgeline would come back to us to let us know how that works out financially. So that concludes my part of the report.
Great, thank you. David, do you want to add anything?
Good job of covering.
Thank you. Tim, did you want to add anything? All right. Let's get go.
Thank you, Mary and David, for putting this together. It's super helpful. I just have a few clarifying questions. I wanted to know a little bit more about the administrative assistant, the administrative assistant position. I guess maybe this is more for David. Is this sort of what Rosa does with this? Is that what we're talking about here? And then is half-time enough? And how is this role different from the board clerk?
The administrative assistant position that exists now with our district is minimal for two reasons. One is because we do not have a lot of foot traffic that comes into the office. So that individual doesn't need to and isn't available Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, so to speak. What I would see is, and what Mary and I talked about for this administrative assistant is truly being much more of a support than currently exists, at least with us, in regard to the different management positions that would exist. But I still do not see it. We just couldn't see it being a full-time position. Is that answering your question?
Sort of, but I still don't understand the difference between that role and the board clerk.
The board clerk position is primarily what each of us have an individual that works a certain amount of hours, that attends meetings, handles minutes, filing in proper spots, resolutions and ordinances, getting legal notices posted, pretty much a support to the board through the respective general manager.
So the administrator, because for right now, Kensington Fire has the position combined with an executive assistant / board clerk. And so separating those it helps to make it cost efficient. Some of the higher level duties then would be performed by the board clerk, whereas the administrative support duties that go along with that, but then also are separate from that, answering phones, things like that would be handled by the administrative assistant.
Thank you. That's super helpful because I was wondering if it would be more efficient to combine those two, but okay, thank you.
Thank you. I think my biggest question here relates to the fire chief reporting directly to the board. And I understand that's how it is now. And I wonder if that is something that is currently specified by the contract, because I know in the past, with the KPPCSD, the police chief used to report directly to the board, and that's been changed. And I was just kind of curious about why the general manager wouldn't oversee the contract in this case.
So I believe it's set in the contract that way, and I wouldn't propose at this time making any kind of a change. That's something that could be explored later if it needed to be, but that's not something that we're proposing for cost purposes. We just want to get the information together that Ridgeline would need for the fiscal analysis, but we wouldn't anticipate any change with that reporting relationship unless the board at that time wanted to look at that.
Maybe we'll just go down the line.
So yeah, perhaps that could come up the next time the contract is renewed. And I had that same question, so thank you, Sylvia, for asking that. So Gail Feldman, who's in the audience, and I were talking about this, and one concern that I share with her is that in trying to combine the two boards, I think it's really important to trim all the fat we can and make sure we're not increasing any roles, because financially, it's pretty critical that this work. And there are a few places where you guys have added a little more support, and perhaps we'll find out that we do need that. after we combine the boards, but before combining, I would personally, agree with Gail that maybe the board clerk position could continue at just a half-time position because it'll still just be one board. And the public safety coordinator position could be more similar to what is currently spent on Johnny Valenzuela's contract. And, I noticed that the administrative assistant job increased from 0.4 to 0.5. It's not much, but it just seems wise to very carefully budget as tightly as we can and not add any roles here. And the public safety coordinator, while I think it's a fabulous idea, and I'm the one who was saying so much at the strategic plan meeting about emergency preparedness because I strongly support it, I just think we've got to combine these two, groups of individuals, and then we can let that joint group make a lot of decisions for the future if we have the money. But money is a real big deal right now. So that's my two cents.
Just a reminder that the FTE calculation of the combined, if you take the two individual districts, I don't think you'll find, and you also look at contracts, I don't, you'll find that we've really added much fat, if any fat, to the combined hypothetical district.
Yeah, what would be the cost comparison for Johnny Valenzuela's contract versus a 1.0 FTE coordinator for emergency preparedness?
Sorry. So for those purposes, we're thinking that it will be essentially equal. There might be some difference, but that's the conversion that we're using as the contract dollars for that position. So if there's some variation in that, there are contract services that we would be saving elsewhere by some of the other positions that we have, the finance HR person that we don't currently have, that we contract out for a lot of services. Those are more expensive. So there would be some savings there. So we actually think this would be less expensive overall, but we don't have that number yet. So just kind of an off the cuff, we think it would be less.
And most of this costing out all of this costing out will be done by Ridgeline Municipal Services, not by us. Yeah. We'll skip the presidents and
I've seen this, and so I really don't have any questions right now.
oh, okay. If we're just going down the line, then I will ask a question. Does the board clerk have duties that are not related to board meetings?
Linnell does. She spends a good amount of time. When I first arrived, she was basically the go-to person for public records requests. We're making an adjustment on that, but she still is heavily involved in public records, especially when it's not on the police side. She's heavily involved in the current website information that we need to keep track of. And then when you talk about board meetings, you have to keep in mind all the peripheral that exists in conjunction with board meetings and following through on such. And then like election information, she keeps track of the various legal requirements that our directors have in their training. She keeps track of. So the answer to your question is yes.
Yeah, I see. That makes sense.
Let me just add then too to that. I've worked with Linnell quite a bit, and frankly, the work she does just for meetings is probably only about half. Well, I have I'll put it in my mouth. There you go. Is that better? Okay, sorry about that. Having worked with Linnell over this past year, her role just at dealing with meetings and the board is only a partial part of what she does. As David pointed out, a lot of it has to do with maintenance of the website and other aspects of the website, keeping track of records and so forth. So it's far more than just coming here and listening to the board, go back and forth, and then writing the minutes up.
And I mean, mostly we've been directing our questions to the staff, but I do want to briefly respond to Cass's comment. I think it's important for this analysis that we don't go in, we don't want to only ask for the most optimistic version of what our staffing needs are. Like maybe we can reduce some of these numbers to smaller numbers, and that may very well be true, and we would totally do that if we combined and we found we didn't need as much staffing. But I don't want to have a situation where we pick the most optimistic possible version of what the district could look like, and then say, oh, look, everything's great. And then meet reality and say, actually, we need to hire more people for this thing. And then all of a sudden proposed savings doesn't materialize, and then people will be upset and things of that sort. So I think we should err on a more middle of the road in terms of what we expect, which may be too much. And we can always trim back if this model of our boards ever comes to reality, we can modify at that time. Yeah, let's just keep going
Thanks.
down.
One thing I wanted to say is our clerk not only does our board meetings, but also our emergency preparedness meetings. So that's like double the meetings already. So that's why I think we need more time, or the time seems to make sense to me. I added up all of it and it in my head and also on a Post-it, and it seemed to even out pretty well when I looked at it.
You can have no comments.
I don't mind sharing.
Do you have?
My own microphone, goodness. I think I'm at an appropriate distance. You guys can hear me okay, not too loud? Okay, Goldilocks. I just went through and did a quick add of the FTEs just to check, and they differ by 0.1. And I think if we imagine this exercise can be done at a resolution of greater than 0.1 FTEs, we're not focusing on the right thing. So I would just say ballpark, they're equal, meso, depending on the ranges. So thank you for that. I'd like to ask something slightly different, which is the assumption is FTEs are all we would get. But if we did the right combination, especially around grant writing and seeking, this would not necessarily be revenue neutral. There would actually be a gain in income, and some of that's pretty low-hanging fruit out there, I think. Theoretically, the fire district contract allows for us to ask El Cerrito for help with that. So far, I'm not aware, that's a statement of my limitations, that we're actually getting any progress in grant writing right now. So my question is really, is there a place in maybe this public safety coordinator for this to be revenue positive, either, the equivalent of COPS grants or emergency grants or Measure X? Is there a logical place where you would get more bang for the buck in this?
And so you're thinking in terms of that position being funded by a grant, or?
No, I'm saying that person would help fund everything.
Oh, yeah.
That would be important.
Yeah.
Regardless of it funding the person.
Yes. And the thought is that position would help us a lot with grants. We just haven't had the time to be able to go there. And once we have more things to find, that position would be better prepared to then go seeking grants, and it would actually be wonderful. And I don't know if it's possible for that position to be grant funded, but that would be anything to explore. But yeah, definitely grant revenue would be ideal for the community. Absolutely.
Julie?
Okay, yeah, thank you. I have just a couple general comments, and then I think my most specific feedback will be about the fire org chart, which is what I know the most about. So I personally find it I've never had an experience, and I've participated in starting up a lot of new organizations. Never had an experience where first you decide what the staff is going to be before you talk about what the organization's going to do. So I find this upside down. For example, we don't know if there was a consolidated district. The fire district has 2 standing committees, and we're actually talking about adding a new one for East Bay Regional Parks. We have the finance committee, we have emergency preparedness. Committee management is a lot of work. And the only way the fire district survived in the past was because Kevin and Larry did all of the work for the emergency preparedness committee meeting. They wrote the agendas, they did the minutes, they wrote the reports. So this document and the discussion so far hasn't told me anything about that aspect of a vision for a combined district. Will there be a volunteer program? 1 or more? If so, who will staff it? As Rick mentions, who will write grant proposals? And most importantly, I think, who is going to fill the gaps of what I see board members doing right now? So a second comment that I have, and I think it's the reality of my writing this down, has been reflected in some of the questions that other directors have asked. I've never seen an org chart rolled out without some semblance, at least 5 to 10 lines of what these positions will do. I think most people don't know what a clerk of the board does. I actually have a packet of job descriptions that I got from KPPCSD when Bob Dice was working with them. He did something similar to this, but far more comprehensive. I have a clerk job description. I have an administrative assistant job description. They were looking for a finance and business operations manager. So I have a pretty good sense of what these people will do. I'm not really fond of this trend toward really too much effort on clerks, but I'll come back to that later. I think now where I get to a real question is, I see these org charts of the current organizations, but my question is, yeah, this is probably what it looks like, although I think there's something missing in fire. But my question is it working? We're losing Tim because he said the job is just too much. We advertised it as a, 50 to 75% job, and it's like impossible to get it done with this org chart. I don't know about the KPPCSD, but as somebody who watches their activities, it strikes me that the board president really does a lot of work that everyone always says board members shouldn't be doing. What I think is missing on the fire organization is that for quite a few years now, we've always had a highly qualified consultant assisting the general manager. Bill Hansel had Mary for quite a few months. Mary had Bill Hansel for quite a few months to help with the public safety building. She also had Bill Zanoni. Tim has Mary. So this is very high level consulting. And I think we found that when Mary sort of rolled off from her consulting with Bill Hansel, there was a substantial amount of the general manager work that he was not able to complete because he was so busy, even with, for a good part of his tenure, this board clerk and executive assistant. For example, I think Mary knows that when she came back on board, she had to catch up with a whole year of minutes. So I'm questioning how realistic this org chart really is in terms of representing the full amount of effort, at least that's going into the fire district. And I think that's important that we capture everything because at some point, costs are going to be assigned to this. And especially with the consulting for the general manager, we essentially have 2 general managers because the kinds of consulting that the general managers have been getting is coming from a former general manager with different kinds of expertise. So I'm a little bit skeptical that this org chart shows everything. And I can't speak to how well the KPPCSD is it working. I mean, I feel like fire is not quite working as well as it was in 2018. We always had our agenda packets on Friday, by Friday afternoon at 3:00, and that was it. Packet was closed, nothing new, nothing came in at the last minute, and the board was very, very happy. There's definitely been a big trend away from that I think has at some point gotten extreme, where we're getting things on the day of the meeting. And we can't possibly, well, speaking for myself, very difficult for me to adequately prepare when I get things on the day of the meeting. So anyway, those are my primary comments for now.
Yes, good evening. I think it's worth pointing out that exactly 3 years ago, the then KPPCSD General Manager Marty Brown put together a comprehensive plan for staffing the administrative department. She assumed a GM, a finance director, office manager, and senior accountant. The staffing cost totaled $442,000 in costs of 3 years ago. And they did not include any benefits to CalPERS. The point that I'd like to make here is I think it's worth taking another look at what Marty Brown did, because her analysis was for a standalone KPPCSD board. And it basically assumed the same number of department staff as what we're talking about for a consolidated board. But what I'm also concerned about is, but I also wish that we had had in tonight's meeting, since we now have a staffing suggestion, is what the cost of that staffing will be. It's not difficult to make assumptions as to how much it's going to cost to hire a general manager working on a 40-hour work week, what the likely cost will be, and on down the line. And we also have to take into consideration that if in fact we consolidate and we go from having basically what are part-time employees to full-time employees under the KPPCSD umbrella, we will be obligated to pay those full-time employees or employees making more than 50% of their annual costs. We will be required to put them into PERS and pay the PERS obligations. And typically PERS obligations for administrative personnel can add another 40% to the overall costs of having these employees. So I think what's also important, and I wish that it had been in tonight's agenda, and I don't think it would have been too difficult to have added it, would be to take a look at what we think the costs, including those additional costs from possibly having PERS obligations, would be versus what the costs are as two separate agencies. That's basically what I have for right now. I'm hoping that when we have our meeting coming up, as we're supposed to with Ridgeline, where we are going to talk about the consolidation issue, that we will be able to get a lot more information added to what it is that we have to look at, both in terms of the overall staffing costs, but the workload. So thank you very much.
I'd like to address a couple of comments that were just made. One is we are not obligated. There's public safety contracts and there's miscellaneous contracts. The amount of hours the miscellaneous employees work does not obligate us to sign up for a CalPERS contract for retirement. Secondly, I also wanted to emphasize that throughout this fiscal analysis, we need to measure apples to apples. So if it is true that either one of our districts is not operating at the efficiency that the board would like to see, you would have to add in what those additional costs would be for the individual board. That would then measure what we're talking about for a consolidated board.
Alex?
Yes, I just wanted to respond to Director Stein's comments. I appreciate you bringing up the lack of job descriptions. I think that would have been helpful, although verbally, I did hear that. And so it would be great though in the future to get something in writing about these jobs. I know they're out there, but that would be really helpful. But really, I'm not as concerned about some of the potential inefficiencies or costs that you think we might have missed. I really do trust our GMs to have a strong handle on what's needed administratively. And so I think if this is what their first kind of best guess is, I think that's really sufficient for the purpose of what we're trying to do here, which is begin a fiscal analysis with our consultant. And with respect to Director Watt's comment, I don't think that was under their purview or their responsibility tonight. That's actually under the contract. That's the scope of work. That's exactly the responsibility of our consultant to do that kind of fiscal analysis, not Mary and not David. And I think it would have been really premature to present those numbers tonight. It would have, I think, clouded our judgment, and we're not there yet. We need to put on paper some kind of structure that we can then put numbers to. And then, I think we can go back and see, if we're missing things. So I'm perfectly happy with what you all have presented. And I think this is exactly what Dimitri needs to get us going. And we have a lot more conversations, Director Watt. I agree, we have a lot of questions, but that's the next stage. One thing I did want to bring up that I didn't see in either org chart before I forget, I don't understand where our tech support and digital community outreach would come in. That's a huge concern to me. As you all have known, we've had consistent problems with tech, and I don't understand from the org chart if that's going to be a consulting thing or what.
So with that, for both agencies, it's currently consulting and it's going to remain consulting. It's not something that we would want to bring in-house. I don't think that takes a special kind of expertise.
But also, we've heard very clearly from the community, especially younger members of the community, that they'd like to see more information shared digitally, and our website should be maintained, our social media should be maintained regularly. So I think relying on just printed material, mailers, it's insufficient in this day and age.
Yeah, that's a good point for future, definitely.
Go for it.
I think I'm pretty comfortable at the level you guys brought this in tonight. I'm pretty comfortable with it, and thank you for, the brush has to be a little bit broad at this stage. But just in terms of bookkeeping of functions, consultants, tech, things like that, one of the efficiencies actually is potentially that you can have one person doing X instead of two, and there may be efficiencies in that. But it's really hard for us to say anything sensible about any of it, and even whether the tasks of people who you would merge or turn into an FTE, really, to Julie's point, which is a fair one. For tonight, I'm not so worried about it, but just maybe as a bookkeeping exercise, maybe as an attention to detail, to make sure nothing falls through the cracks. That's, a quarter of an FTE in each district. Before that goes to Dimitri, maybe list those and just say, well, Dimitri, there might be a better way of doing this. We can partner a little bit on this. But anyway, just a little more explicitness. I missed the conversation on Edie, and so I'm not exactly sure that I missed her job function, and so I think it got rolled into something, but I missed it.
Do you mean ID Bailey?
ID, sorry.
They're actually a consulting firm that does our accounting work.
Okay, it is. So you're, okay, thank you. But
Yeah.
those kinds of things, you're merging them into a person. Just being a little more explicit about it would be helpful for me and maybe for the tallying at the end to say we haven't dropped anything.
Yeah, so with the financial consulting, we did reference Edie Bailey. That's a financial consultant for KPPCSD, and we have consulted various consultants, including myself at KFPD. And that's what we talked about converting into a finance manager, because that would be a little bit higher level than the current finance position at KPPCSD versus some of the consulting services. So it's a lot of things kind of merged together and probably not as easy for you to see, but that's we keep in mind those costs that are we'll make sure that when we provide that overall structure, the Dimitri Ridgeline would know what we are, what we would say would kind of go away or be eliminated or be reduced as a consulting service versus a position that would be combined, et cetera. So he'll get more detail, but we wanted the overall structure for the board.
Yeah, go for it.
Along the same lines, as far as the hypothetical org chart, I did get the impression that you were eliminating outsourcing any accounting, and I'm very concerned about resilience. I assume you're still going to outsource payroll, or are you bringing payroll in?
So yeah, it would be a payroll service that is the finance manager would work with the payroll service. So yeah, that would remain in place. It's not a high cost.
Well, I think the most important position in the organization that needs to be covered by resilience is the finance manager. You may be lucky enough to have a general manager who also has expertise in finance. But basically, I think if you have one board clerk and they leave, one administrative assistant, they leave, any one of these positions, if you just have one and they leave, somebody else can pick up the slack. But if the finance manager leaves, unless the general manager knows how to prepare payments and pay bills and keep the books, you're really in a lot of trouble. And the company, very small company that I work with right now, we started out, we have a public accounting firm. And then we thought, oh, it would be so great. We just bring this all in-house. We were all ready to bring payroll, bookkeeping, everything in-house. And then, of course, the one person who was going to do it quit. And we said, thank goodness we didn't do that. We would have really been up a creek. So I am concerned about resilience, and I am concerned. I always imagined in a combined organization that one position would also be a deputy director, because I think the general manager needs a second in command. General managers get sick, they take vacations. To my mind, the finance manager would be the natural choice for that. So those are my comments, but I thought that one reason that I had at one point supported this idea of consolidation was to establish more resilience for Kensington, because neither agency is resilient right now.
I think you hit a nail on the head with the finance discussion. And I think between the staff management and the board, there needs to be some hard discussion about what you just said and the value and the cost of in-house versus contract. I agree with you 100% on that.
Actually, I want to jump in. I also thought that the finance HR person made total sense to me as the second in command, especially considering the situation we have on the KFPD side, where that's essentially the general manager is finance and everything else. And I love our general managers that are past and present that are here, but it's always very stressful when our general manager leaves, because that's pretty much the entire staff for the entire district who handles basically everything. So one thing I like about the structure is it's a lot more resilient than what we have right now. If if Mary wasn't available to come back, then and Tim, who's still onboarding on the finance, we have to get another general manager and he has to onboard that person. And it's just it's right now on the KFPD, it's very stressful. And I liked this structure precisely because it sort of addresses some of that. I know you had mentioned that the public safety coordinator as like a assistant to the GM, but I agree with Julie that I thought the finance manager as the assistant to GM to me makes more sense. And I think also that gets you some more of that resilience by if they're working closely together, then they're probably both fairly familiar with the work. So if one leaves, the other can step into their role and vice versa. I did have other questions, but did you look like you had a question?
Well, I want to agree with Julie's point that resiliency is an important issue here. And unfortunately, as David has pointed out, resiliency is a problem right now with both districts. And whether this structure of a combined district makes it more resilient, because you may be able to pay better and have a more secure situation, I don't know. I think the problem is that with special districts in particular, there is a lot of turnover, and that is the name of the game. I think if we look back at some of the issues, and Julie pointed out after 2018, there've been difficulties with the fire district on bringing agendas and so forth. But you also have to recognize at that time, that's when the building design was being discussed in detail. And shortly thereafter, a couple of years, the building started to be constructed. So I think that gets weighed into what's happening with the fire district, and certainly with our district, we've been unable to find a permanent general manager. And so that's been a resiliency problem as well. So I think from my perspective, a combined district would probably be more resilient because of the ability to pay and find qualified people.
Did you still have your point? Okay, sorry, we'll go back to Rick.
Sorry, thank you.
Okay.
In my field, which is quite different, there are, but this is not an unusual thing in finance consulting. There are companies that will provide people into roles in fairly cost-effective fashion, but that also do their own internal backup and redundancy for you. And this is probably a lot to ask of Ridgeline, but I wonder if we could cost these as FTE equivalents, if you will. So FTEs that effectively are a backed up corporate provided person in that role. Now, it's not cheap, but it is also different. You tend to get high functioning, but perhaps not as far advanced in their career folk in those positions. And it can be cost effective in different roles. So they probably know more about that than most of us, having seen a lot of things across many districts. So I don't know if that's a possibility, but.
Yeah, and that's definitely something that would be considered. And the challenge with that is the job market. The individuals that are serving in those kinds of roles right now are few and far between. Just in my experience with finance, coming up with people that are interested and willing to do that type of work and part-time and flexibly. We haven't seen a lot of that, but it's not that it's not out there, and sometimes it's just not cost effective because it's more expensive than getting someone in-house that can handle other tasks that we don't really have covered.
Cass?
So of course, Dimitri is going to be looking at the economies of scale. But I just want to mention them for people who, haven't heard it in a while, just to remind us all. We can save on joint, combining the two: utilities, supplies, phone, email, insurance, office space. So hopefully there will really be some financial savings, not just in the staffing. And Also, for those who haven't heard it for a while, on the topic of resiliency, I'm totally in agreement with that. A bigger organization has a lot more, flexibility and redundancy in case of disasters. And besides that, I'm just going to real quick skip over a bunch of great things that would happen with consolidation. There would be a single forum for discussion within the board and with the public.
Cass, is this about staffing?
No.
Okay.
But I think it's really important that we go over these things because the public have not heard this for a long time. And, if you want me to.
Cass, it's not on the agenda. The
It's not-
agenda is the administrative structure.
Structure.
Okay.
We'll have more discussions about
Okay.
consolidation, but
Well, I'll save it for my director's comments and next week.
There you
Thank you.
Jim,
I think that one of the things that we have to consider here is that what we are looking at is a reorganization chart based upon the situation as it currently stands. But what is happening right now is that the fire board is currently finishing up a major remodel of the public safety building. And the time and effort that staff has been putting into that is considerable. We estimate that our staff cost for this last fiscal year will be approaching approximately $200,000. A lot of that time was spent overseeing the construction of that public safety building. And the reason for pointing that out is because now that that is coming to an end, I would expect that some of these costs that we are showing in our annual reports for staffing will diminish because we will not have to devote that amount of time to it. Conversely, the KPPCSD is embarking upon a new police station in Kensington Park. And I can tell you that the amount of time and effort that it will be undertaken starting right now will be considerable just to oversee that process. So none of that is built in that I know into the potential changes in the cost between the two boards. And I think it's important that we do that.
Alex?
I just want to remind Director Watt that we're still very much in the early fact-finding stage, and we have not yet voted as a board to embark on this journey that you mentioned. It's definitely still on the table, and we're looking at all options, but we still have a lot of information to gather before we have not taken a vote on that. But
I had a quick question, actually, for the chief of, no, I can ask you a question. Because it was mentioned that this hypothetical public safety coordinator role might assist with grants, and from I never come to your meetings in person, but I do always watch them. It sounds like you're actually pretty good at getting grants, and you have a lieutenant or someone who's, I think, is just always finding you grants. Would it be useful to not have them have to have that job too, or is this like one of their fun things?
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Good evening, members of the public. It is useful for the author of the grant to manage the grant in a law enforcement setting. We have a lieutenant that wrote about $200,000 in grants over the last 18 months, and he is managing those grants. They have to be serviced on a regular basis. In May, our police consultant, Jason Haynes, that the board agreed to sign a contract with most recently, submitted $260,000 in grants. And those are federal grants. Those are a COPS grant to fund a police officer and a micro grant to fund community outreach programs. It does help when the person who writes the grant actually services it because they know the parameters within it. But it's not unheard of for someone to write a grant and then hand it off for somebody else to service. I hope that helped.
No, that was very helpful. Thank you.
I'd like to point out too that covers especially the law enforcement side of the house. With Jason Haynes, we actually specifically asked if he would be looking for other types of grants, and the answer is yes. So the grant function is very important. And, I think that this is, I'm pretty comfortable with what Mary and David have put forward as a hypothetical structure at this point. As with anything, as time goes on and whatever happens, things change. But for the moment in time that we're at with the task at hand for the RFP, I'm pretty comfortable with where we're at.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess the other thing that had just occurred to me is, and thank you, no, you don't have to get up again, but you reminded me that the grants that the lieutenant was applying for are police grants, and the KPPCSD does things that are not police. So presumably things like, I think you got $180,000 for this building from a grant. So there's that.
Yeah, yeah, Jason Haynes has a consultant that's an expert with over 35 years with the county and federal grants, FEMA grants and such, and they're actively pursuing those starting July 1st.
Okay, great. Good to know. Thank you. Are there other questions, discussion, things? We could go to public comment if there aren't at this time. Oh yeah, go for it.
I just had one more comment, kind of an initial reaction to the hypothetical again. Struck me that it's a bit top heavy with greater levels of FTE for the more expensive people and only a half-time administrative assistant, half-time park worker. Like I said, I know the fire district and how it functions better than I know the KPPCSD, but the full-time general manager will be very active. I think the clerk, if anybody's looked at the salary of the full-time El Cerrito clerk, you will be shocked. Clerks are very expensive. And I also don't know if we're really going to find 75%. You may find half-time, you may find full-time. So it just struck me that with the full-time finance manager, which I think is important, typically you'd see like an accounting assistant or something like that. I just don't know if there's enough administrative assistance to the what I would call more executive level positions.
Any other comments before we go to public comment? Let's go to public comment. Are there comments in the room? Oh, yes, please. Oh, the microphone is over there.
You can put it up there, Rob.
It's too big. Is this on? I guess it is. The KPOA that I'm speaking for just wants to provide its broader perspective on this administrative structure meeting. And first, thank you so much for the work all of you have done on this. I think it's thorough so far. So in perspective, a unified district costing significantly more than two separate districts is highly unlikely. The financial comparison, while important, is not the only critical reason for unifying the districts. Our perspective is that more effective administrative governance is actually the most important issue. United staffs, for example, one general manager, one highly qualified financial manager, one clerk, one accounting firm, one law firm, fewer consultants, and one auditor. Also, a dedicated integrated deliberation and focus on Kensington rather than separate deliberations within two separate districts, and clearer openness of one board to the public, among other benefits. This administrative structure would be in stark contrast to the present structure. An example of dysfunction is that the KPPCSD has had 6 GMs since 2017, and the FPD has had 7, even if we count the 3 from a consulting firm as 1. That is over 1.5 per year. That's not a criticism of the boards. It's a function of the separation of powers and the way they have had administrative structure. Finally, and this is just for the record, finally, some have said that other district unifications are not like Kensington's possible one, and therefore it would be difficult. That is because others unify across multiple community boundaries with different residents. LAFCO Executive Officer Tashira has told us that our unification is simple with exactly the same households in both districts. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments in the room?
Thank you. Gail Feldman, and I just want to say that for over 20, now it's been 30 years since I've lived in Kensington, I've been advocating for district consolidation. So I am thrilled to be here tonight and that you're all here tonight talking about this and that we're going to actually see some solid numbers come through. So I appreciate this, but I do have some comments about the proposal, some of which you probably have heard already. But generally, what I would really like to see out of this analysis is really an apples to apples comparison, because part of this is also making a clear case to the community about why we need to do this, why this may not be a huge financial burden to the taxpayers of the community. And so we want to be sure that we are comparing closely enough what exists now with the two districts separate, and then how this would appear as a combined effort with the same staffing. So not that there's anything necessarily wrong with the district staffing proposal that was given to you. I just have some concerns about how it really relates to what exists exactly now. So one of the things that, and just looking at it, and I have to say that KPPCSD has had several different variations of staffing over the last maybe 6 years. So when I just added the numbers up, you know, it's somewhere between, I think right now you're at about 2.67, it's 2.65 FTE, but I think a few years ago it was over 3 because you had some other positions. But anyway, it's been fluid. So I think that's something we can accept, that something can change once you finally make a decision as a board, you know, what you're going to do. But for the purposes of the fiscal analysis, I think it would be better to just keep as close to what you have now, except for obviously we want to show a combined 1 FTE for the general manager and finance director, which KPPCSD did have a full-time fiscal manager at one point, and it has only recently changed due to circumstances of having the finance manager leave. And so therefore Edie Bailey was hired to do some of those functions. So I think those are very justifiable as representing more or less what is the current situation with the district. But I do think that things like the park worker and the public safety coordinator, I don't even consider those really administrative functions as much as programmatic. And so I don't know if you really want to include that in the, as calling it a administrative staffing, and maybe
Please address to the board.
yes, sorry. Call it administrative staffing and just leave that with the actual functions that would be managing the district activities. That's just something to consider. And I also have concern about making FTEs out of contractors right now. I think that's something the boards should discuss at some point as your needs, you know, you decide what your needs are for the programming. But anyway, that would be something I would recommend.
30 seconds.
Okay. Yeah. So just to wrap up, the other thing I would like to see is that you asked the fiscal analysis to include a look at how you would what the salary and benefit packages would be, so that there's an option for both defined benefits and non-defined benefits, so that we know what can be afforded by the district. And I think that would be very helpful to the public as well. So
Great.
thank you.
Thank you very much. There's two, there's Dimitri and Linda.
Paul Doro, first of all, to every one of the directors, thank you so much for being here tonight. In my opinion, this is a milestone, a very welcome one. The discussion has been great. And I have a couple of thoughts about maybe immediate next steps. I believe both boards have had experience using search consultants, executive recruiters, to basically recruit their various GMs. And I would be interested in knowing what the professional recruiter take is on the talent pool available if you're recruiting for a full-time permanent general manager versus recruiting for somebody who's going to have a limited number of hours and potentially a limited engagement. You're talking about recruiting for somebody who's potentially going to have career skin in the game to be successful. And I think that would also apply to other of the full-time equivalent positions here. So it's not exactly like sports, but if you get a real star, then you can't measure the value of what you're getting by the dollars, or if you paid them $1,000 or $2,000 a month more in terms of achieving what you want to achieve. So that would be my hope, that you'll take that into account. The other observation about the hypothetical org chart is you've got 3 full-time positions. In my business experience, that tells me that you've got the core of a team that can back each other up and support each other, and will have a joint mission to serve the community well. So good start. Thank you very much also to the staff for the great work that's been done here. Just way to go. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. My name is David Fike. Appreciate the opportunity to comment as well. And wanted to echo my kudos and gratitude, as previous speakers have, for you taking on this conversation, for the caliber of this conversation this evening. I was able to, thanks to modern technology, stuck in traffic on the bridge on the way back from San Francisco, had the webinar on and was listening to all of the very good conversation about some of the trade-offs and the challenges of how do we be more efficient as as a community and our staffing? How do we have more productivity from our staffing, right? You know, how do we get more out of the existing staff that we have, or how do we get more things, address more of the issues and challenges with the existing staff that we have? Or how might we do the existing number of issues and challenges at slightly more cost-effective basis? I think those are all the kinds of critical questions that the community is grateful that you as a board, with the support of staff, are taking on this discussion. The one thing that I wanted to add, though, in addition to that question of sort of how does the administrative structure enhance or potentially enhance if we consolidate issues of productivity and efficiency, is that, you know, my experience as a manager is that staff really are best able to do both, be efficient and productive, when they have very clear priorities. And so one of the things that I felt it was important for us not to leave here tonight, I realize the discussion is on administrative structure, but one of the things that many of us in the community believe is that consolidating to have one board is essential to give clear priorities to the staff about what we think is important in a community. And having 2 boards, unfortunately, we've seen and we are concerned will continue to perpetuate a lack of clear priorities. So administrative structures are really important, and productivity and enhancing the productivity of our staff comes from having the kind of clear priorities that we think consolidation could bring about. Thanks very much.
Thank you. If there's no other public comment in the room, we'll go to the Zoom. Dmitry Semenov.
Good evening. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Great. So first of all, I want to say thank you for finding the time and getting together. I think this is amazing. Having this conversation is extremely, extremely important. I think the GMs and their and the staff has put a lot of effort into thinking through what the combined district might look like. And there's a few things that I wanted to mention. I really enjoyed listening to the discussion and the comments. I think the Director Stein's comment about making sure we understand where we're going and designing the structure the right way fits right into what we talked about earlier about the importance of strategic planning and understanding what we're doing. And I had a privilege of working with the KPPCSD on a strategic planning workshop. And it was really fascinating to see we have all these great priorities and then beginning to think through, okay, how do we get this done? So I think this is a great thing to think about. And then President Levine's statement about not being overly optimistic, but being realistic in planning for the staff is also extremely important. Do we have the vision? Do we have the people to help us execute the vision? Those would be the questions I will be asking the staff and the working groups on both sides as we're going into the comparison part of the fiscal analysis. In order to compare apples to apples, it's important to remember that we're not trying to compare today to the future, today for individual districts and in the future for a hypothetical consolidated district, but the future of the individual districts with the consolidated alternative. So those are the questions, we've done a lot of work on the police side already, and both Davids have had to answer a lot of questions from our side. We ask a lot of questions. So we'll continue asking questions, and then because in answering the questions and thinking through the situations, that's what allows to put together a really good and useful analysis that helps you to determine how to move forward in the future. So I just wanted to say thank you for doing this. This is a great effort. I think you're on the right course. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. I see another hand, Linda. Has Linda been allowed to talk? Ah, I see.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Ah, good. Usually people tell me they can hear me even when I'm not on the microphone or even over the, forget it anyway. I'm going to read this because that's the quickest way to get through to you. First, honestly, and from my heart, I'd like to thank each of you honorable directors for serving on your board. And I'd like to thank you for letting me speak today on the issue of consolidation of the two districts. I want to talk about policy and the philosophy underlying policy. I served 4 years on the KPPCSD, and I've long been an advocate of consolidation. If we have just one board of directors of a consolidated district, which has as its charge the comprehensive public safety of our community, we are one town. We have a greater chance to avoid sacrificing one set of public safety concerns, such as police services, for another set of safety concerns, i.e. fire services. Consolidating those public safety objectives under one board will impose a fiduciary duty on the directors of that consolidated board to consider all of Kensington's safety needs when making decisions. With our separate districts of fire and police, we have suffered what once was the unthinkable, and that is the eviction of our much admired and critically needed police from the new, and I emphasize new, and many millions of dollars of value public safety building, which is now turned into a fire station only building, which also serves as the third station of our neighboring city. No sloughing on them. They're honorable and they do a good job, but that's in fact what is going on. I'm not the only one who thinks this. LAFCO, the Local Agency Formation Commission, has recommended this since at least the 2009 Municipal Service Review. In reviewing Kensington's separate public safety districts, the 2009 MSR stated, quote, consolidation could offer opportunities to the community in exercising greater control over the share of local property tax dollars spent on fire, emergency medical services, law enforcement, and other services. Consolidation of KFPD with KPPCSD could streamline local government and possibly offer more options on allocating public safety funds
30
within the
seconds.
community. End of quote. Yeah, I know I'm at the end. And I urge you to move forward and contact LAFCO in order to consolidate our two districts into one well-functioning whole, one town. I've been here 47 years, still one town. Thank you.
Thank you. Please lower your hand.
Oh, I'm
Never-
not used to lowering my hand. Okay. Right.
And also please mute yourself.
All right.
Are there any other public comments? Going once? Going twice? Public comment is now closed. Back to the directors. Are there any other things we would like to discuss? I have a quick question for the staff. With all this talk about efficiency and resilience and you have actually been staff members of our current districts. Do you feel that this structure would allow you to do your jobs better or the same as what you're doing now? Or is it just a bigger house and we all live in it?
So I'll take that first. So for Kensington Fire, I think especially the administrative staff and some of the other positions, the finance position, having that as an in-house position is something severely lacking. And we know that from experience. And so it would be very helpful to the general manager to have that additional support staff, and then to have some of the other positions taking some of the duties away from the general manager that are currently handled not most cost effectively, and then also because one person only has so much time. So I think that, in my opinion, from what I've experienced in the last number of years, it would be better for the organizational structure to look something like this to help support the general manager and the agency operations and supporting the board as well.
Same thing. I mean, when we talked about this, if I was there, I'd be very comfortable with this setup.
Let me ask a question too. I want to follow up actually what Julie, a good point. Sorry about that. This is a point Julie made, and that has to do with the directors doing a lot of what the staff are normally doing in other jurisdictions, large ones, presume. So do you see this structure as helping reduce the load on directors in doing what I would have to say they're doing now as partially staff activities?
Well, I think there's a number of things that need to be considered. Me specifically, I've been limited in the amount of time that I can spend. So I'm not even a half employee because of the CalPERS restrictions. So if you took another 150 hours, that would have helped reduce some of the work that some of the directors have had to do that realistically should have been staff time. But in the overall scheme of what we presented, what Mary presented today, I believe that all 10 directors here would be able to spend their time on governance and not, as I think Julie brought out, the different board members that were taking minutes and coordinating committees. I think that to answer your question, David, yes, you would reduce that and produce a lot more valuable work for this community.
And on the fire district side, I mean, that public safety building project has taken a lot of the time for the general manager, and that obviously will be coming to an end. So in this structure, it doesn't take that into account because that project would be done. So those resources would be available to help support other functions and such that the board would not be doing the work of the staff and stick with governance, just as David said.
I'm muted. Are there any final comments from any of the directors? Oh, yep.
Are we going to run down a list and final comments, or this is just if
No.
anyone wants to make
Yeah,
them?
go for
Okay.
it.
Some of you have heard me wax a little bit on this topic, so I'll try and restrain myself. But in the presence of colleagues who might not have heard that, I view one of the big opportunities for both districts, separate or combined, figure out how to leverage the community and to take volunteerism, which is one of the best aspects of the community, and incorporate it into formal operations. I personally don't think the fire district whose policies specifically prohibit this in standing committees actually can't function without changing, in my view. This is not something the board's discussed. But I would go so far as to say that districts, consolidated or not, are going to have to figure out how to expand our functions using more people in the community. And to do that, we have to think long and hard about our operating model and what future allows that best. Now, I don't know, some of that actually is financial. Some of that is just about how the board of directors will be purposed. I don't know if there's a way to incorporate this into the financial analysis and the thinking of the financial analysis. And there's a joint board meeting where we're going to talk a little bit aspirationally, not just in structure, but in the future of the district. We might have to iterate on this because it's one of the best things about the opportunity. We talk about resilience and a number of other things. How do we embed those values that people are mentioning into this process as we go, when even as a fire district, we're still getting our arms around the fire district alone part of this. So my hunch is we're, as a group and as a community, going to have to iterate on this a little bit in relatively short amounts of time. And so that's a long-winded way of saying we should not hesitate to think a little bit big in this moment, even though we're starting small. Starting small is really appropriate given where we are, but we should try and think a little bit big. So that's.
Julie, did you have a comment too?
Well, I think one of my questions was for David, and he just stepped
Oh.
out. David Aranda, I'll just wait till he comes back.
Okay. In the meantime, I guess I haven't actually necessarily, I realized you said it. I think that this draft of what an administrative structure looks like is sensible and as a good starting point to send to Ridgeline and get them to cost things out. That would be great. And then we can talk about it with numbers. Speaking for myself. Oh, yes, Cass?
Would you like to entertain a motion?
We don't technically have a motion on the.
We are not.
You can express your opinion.
I am willing to agree with the new proposed structure.
Okay.
Personally, and thank you for creating it.
Yes, thank you so much.
I think I could try asking my question to Mary.
Okay, go for it.
Might know as well. And it's really a follow-up on the question Jim had, and I might not have been listening carefully enough to the answer. But it's the whole issue of whether the staff and here comes David, so he can hear also. My question is to ask for clarification to the best of what you know about the staff in the KPPCSD who are not safety staff being subject to CalPERS, because as we know, the GMs, Tony, yourself, have always had the hard stop of 960 hours. I've got this report from Bob Dice from the 2018 Sloan, Sakai, Young and Wong. And he says that CalPERS has been all over the place in answering that question. And I don't know if anything has changed, but my question has always been, if the non-safety staff are not subject to CalPERS, why do our GMs keep running up against that 960-hour limit?
It was a decision that was made in the CalPERS system with a lot of waffling going back and forth. But as we're sitting here tonight, that's the decision we're gonna have to live with. And I will say this board has spent a good amount of time trying to figure out how to change that CalPERS law, and it's not looking positive.
But is it for the entire staff? In other words, the full-time finance manager, the 75% clerk of the board, is it for everyone or just the GM? Because I remember a
The
KPPC.
retired annuitant issue.
No, well,
I'll clarify because
well,
I think there's you're talking about apples to oranges here.
I don't think so.
The GMs are subject to the 954 is because they themselves are CalPERS retirees and are subject to the rules of governing CalPERS retirees. I think your question about the non-safety staff, if I understood General Manager's response, if they are not performing safety functions and are not performing a majority of safety functions, then they are, in my understanding, not required to be enrolled in CalPERS. They wouldn't be.
But
Let me try to
that's
clarify.
not my question.
Let me try to
Wait,
clarify.
Well,
If-
can I just
wait,
make sure everybody knows
wait,
what
ask-
my
yeah,
question
Ask your
is?
question again, Julie.
Well, okay, look at KFPD. We are out of CalPERS. We have been out of CalPERS for a long time. I was just on the CalPERS website. We don't show up as a CalPERS employer. KPPCSD does show up as a CalPERS employer. We take Mary as one example, who is a CalPERS retiree. She has no 960-hour limit because we as an agency are not a member of CalPERS anymore. So I think it's the ambiguity between if KPPCSD non-safety staff were considered to not be part of CalPERS, then you could be, in theory, working for us full-time. It wouldn't matter that you're a CalPERS retiree, the same way that it doesn't matter that Mary is. So it's really about the status of the agency, and it looks like the refinement in the KPPCSD case is safety versus non-safety.
Well, let me just try to explain. It's not really that. CalPERS has a policy, an interpretation of the law, the CalPERS law, that if the general manager oversees an organization that has contracts with CalPERS, that is the public safety, for pension, then that general manager, if he's a retired annuitant, is subject to the retirement rules, retired annuitant rules, which is the 960 hours and all the other aspects of that. However, if if a new general manager were hired, let's say in a combined district, it does not obligate that general manager or the organization, that is the combined district, to contract with CalPERS because it's a different category. It's called miscellaneous. So the choice could be made to either contract or not contract for retirement services for CalPERS for the miscellaneous category. However, if we decided to contract for a general manager in a combined district, we would also be obligated to provide CalPERS benefits for the other staff. And so that's the problem.
Yeah, that was my understanding from a conversation with the prior board had when they were trying to decide in recruiting a general manager for KPPCSD, whether to make it a CalPERS position and thereby make it more attractive. But then the entire staff would become, and it's not a bad thing for people. It's a great thing for people. they would be CalPERS employees or whatever you call it.
Right.
They'd get CalPERS benefits.
Yes.
And indeed, to your point, the interim general manager, Mr. Benson, did bring that issue to the board a couple of years ago.
Alex?
I want to thank Director Stein for bringing that great question up. I think this is actually a fascinating conversation because it's a great example of what one unified board could do together in answering some really tricky questions. So it's actually making me optimistic of what a unified board could look like. I think that specific question is a more legal one and one that we should perhaps leave to the experts, but I appreciate being brought up. I want to really, and I think we're about to end, but I really want to thank everyone here, all the directors and all the staff. This has been a fascinating conversation. It's making me really optimistic of the process and what could be. And I think it's important for all of us to remember that what we're trying to do is to create a stronger, more resilient, brighter Kensington, and to really make sure that we are equipped as a unified community to deal with impending, natural disasters or fiscal priority conversations. And I think we can do that much more efficiently and make wiser decisions together versus having two separate boards. And that's my personal opinion, but I think this is a really great start. And I want to thank all the directors for this high level conversation.
But I just want to add that this is something that I think Mr. Seminoff, it's not just a legal question for somewhere down the line, because this is a crucial costing issue. I've spoken with someone from El Cerrito who understands their budget very well. And when you're in CalPERS, they're currently using a factor of 1.6. So for every dollar you spend on salary, you really spend 1.6. At the university, it's 1.49, but it's not insignificant. So my sense is, he can tell us differently, is I think he's going to have to cost this out in different ways. And I do think it's a benefit that the fire district would be losing, because we have a lot more flexibility right now that we're not in CalPERS. So we can hire freely CalPERS annuitants who could be full-time if they want. So it's actually quite an important trade-off, I think, and I hope various scenarios do come out in the cost analysis for that.
I agree. Thank you.
Let me just say, I want to agree with Julie as well, and for a discussion down the road for Dimitri in particular, there are different options, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a CalPERS situation. So that's for a later day. I'd just like to thank the staff for doing what they've done and putting this together. And frankly, it's been I think a very good process of having us come together here. We've been very civil, which is very important, I think, and for the community to see us working together, discussing this together, and trying to come to some understanding of how to go forward. I would like to see us use this structure and provide it to Ridgeline for their analysis of a combined district for the fiscal analysis.
Great. With that, there's no other comments. All right. 10 minutes early. That's never happened in the fire district before. I'm kidding. At least not this year. We're adjourned. Thank you.